artists who've made an impact on culture and history. A few names that might come to mind are Van Gogh, Da Vinci, and Dali. But have you ever heard of Georgia O'Keeffe? If you're interested in art, this underrated artist might be right for you. As someone who studies artists, I personally found her very interesting. Georgia O'Keeffe is a talented artist with an interesting life. And today, I will tell you about Georgia O'Keeffe's childhood, adulthood, and her impact on the art scene. First, I'll tell you about her childhood. Georgia O'Keeffe was born on November 15, 1887, and she was the second of 7 children. She was born on a small dairy farm near the small town of Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, and she had been interested in art from a young age. Her parents had taken notice of this and had tutored her a little bit from home, and as soon as she went to school, her teachers also noticed this talent of hers and tried to foster that in her. She learned a lot in school, but she wanted to learn more and was excited for when she graduated and could go off to college to learn art more professionally. She decided that she would be an artist, and she had made the severe plans to do so. As an adult, she would prove that she was able to do anything that she set her mind to, and that she did have the talent required. So, let's move on to adulthood. In 1905, she started at the Art Institute of Chicago, but then later moved to the New York Art Students League, and there she studied realism. She was very good, but realism was never her passion. Even though she'd won awards in it, she wanted something more. So, later, she moved to the University of Virginia to study under Arthur Wesley Dow. According to Lord Livesey of The Portrait of an Artist, Dow was a Methodist, and he had the feelings and ideas come from intelligence, and that in art they can be expressed through line color and notation. He was a big inspiration for her, as modernism was not really something she'd explored before meeting Arthur. Later on, she moved to teach at Amarillo, Texas in 1912 and the University of Virginia in 1913. There she studied and worked more on her modernism and even taught some of her students it, which was unheard of at the time. In 1916, O'Keeffe had 10 paintings admitted to the Avant-Garde Gallery in New York by Alfred Steinmetz. And in February of 1918, she took an internship underneath him, but later they fell in love. But this would have been controversial at the time, as he was 25 years her senior and married. But this didn't stop them. They moved in together, and as soon as he was divorced, they were married. He set his whole life to make sure that her name got out there in the art scene. And even though he'd been introduced to her art beforehand, it's often viewed in history's eyes as him only promoting her because of their relationship. However, he got her name out into the art scene, which allowed her to prosper and get her name further out there than it would have without him. Speaking of the art scene, let's talk about her effect on it and the symbolism within her art. She is known as the mother of modern art, and she became a teacher of multiple different kinds of art, which was rare for the time. She had many different kinds of art, and she had won many awards for it. For example, in Georgia O'Keeffe, a painter, American painter by Barbara Walter Lyons, it was agreed that her art was often misunderstood and misinterpreted by history. Here's a few examples of her art. She was known for painting flowers, and one interesting thing about all of her flowers is that their flowers had no specific gender, if that makes sense. There was no specific gendered parts on any of her flowers. She painted lots of landscapes with lots of large shapes and wild colors. For example, this lighthouse has lots of interesting shapes to it, which was a key piece of modernism. And this was one of the pieces that she won an award for, and it was of the skyscrapers in New York while she lived there. And this is another one of New York, further on into her career as she developed more and further into modernism. Her art was often considered feminine and soft just because she was a woman, even though her art had nothing to do with her gender, but because of the time that she existed in, lots of her art was pushed down or believed that it couldn't be as good. Even Arthur Wesley Dowd, who had been her big mentor, also didn't see quite as much merit in her art as others. And even Steinmetz, her husband, had pushed down her art as that of a woman. Even though he supported and paraded her art around, it was never quite as revered as it should have been, just simply because she was a woman. But with lots of work, she was able to make a life for herself and a name in the art field. Georgia O'Keeffe was a very talented artist with a very interesting life. Today, you heard about Georgia O'Keeffe's childhood, her adulthood, and her impact on the art scene as a whole. As I learned about Georgia, I felt that it was an interesting story that needed to be told more often, and that her place in the history of modernism, especially in the world today, where realism is less revered than abstract art, needs to be mentioned more often. She shouldn't be forgotten to the sands of time. Thank you all for coming.